Hi, my name's Debbie Peterson, and I'm the children's pastor here at Awake Church in Winston Salem, North Carolina. I'm also the mom of 5 sons. Their ages are 26, 24, 22, 21, and 18. My oldest just got married recently to a fabulous girl. And I also have been the children's pastor for 5 years, also have taught school for 20 years. So I've been around children a lot. So I'm just getting on here today just to share some things I've learned through the years about raising children. And my whole purpose in doing this is to help parents to raise children in this culture to be Christians and to grow in their faith. And so I'm just going to jump right in and talk about raising our kids at a young age. We raise our kids with Bible stories and with Bible verses and sharing our own faith with them and being a Christian example, not perfectly, but to the best of our ability. But I just have some ideas about what should be shared at some point with your kids as you're raising them. And my first idea is that at some point you should be having a conversation with kids about them having their own faith. I've shared with my kids that just because Dad and I are Christians and we have our own faith doesn't mean that you should have a faith just because we do. We want you to be critical thinkers and have your own faith, and we are so convinced that Jesus lived, died, rose again, and that the Christian life is the best way to live, that we welcome you to ask questions and to challenge things that we say so that we can all learn together. We don't expect you just to believe everything that we say. And the importance of that is that we don't want our kids to believe what everybody says. So when we give them this invitation to ask questions and that to be a safe place for them to ask questions, that just opens up a whole world of growth, because just asking questions creates an environment of growth in your family. And so that would be one thing that I think is an important thing for parents to do with their kids. Another thing would be to share with your kids at some point why you believe what you believe. We want to share with our kids why we believe anyone lived in history. Like, you can just pick a historical figure and say, why do we believe, let's say, Abraham Lincoln lived or George Washington? We've never seen him. We don't know anyone who knows him. So even if you Googled it and you said, why do we know that George Washington lived? They will give you a list of things that they use in history to decide if a person is even real. And they will say things like, we have documents, writings from that person. We have things that other people have said about that person, documents, writings, portraits. We have a home that they used to live in. And we see the changes that they created in history. And so no one that I know disputes that Abraham Lincoln lived, right? But lots of people have a belief that Jesus never lived. And so a reassuring thing that we can share with our kids is that there have been more documents written about Jesus than any other person in history. And even though that's enough for some people, that there's a lot of documents for George Washington, doesn't seem to be enough for Jesus. But for us, it is. There are more things written about him by people who actually walked with him and who were believers, and also people that weren't believers at all, but they wrote about him. And so I have gone over with my kids some of those things that could be convincing proofs. I have talked about writings of people in history that told about Christians in first century who were made human torches because their faith was so strong that Jesus lived. And I might pose a question to my kids like, why would someone be willing to die such a terrible, brutal death if they were not convinced that Jesus actually lived? And these things written about these people that died for their faith are written by non-believers. Also, the men that walked with Jesus wrote embarrassing stories about themselves. They wrote about how women were more brave than they were. And why would someone tell stories like that unless they were really convinced about the truth of Jesus? I've also shared with my kids that, there were writings of the Old Testament, and We, in 1948, found copies of these old writings that were thousands of years old, and we compared them to the writings from long ago that had been rewritten, and they matched almost perfectly. Never has that happened with other documents that I know of, where we have found one later in life and matched it to one that was written thousands of years ago, and they matched up perfectly. And so I think it's important that we give our kids lots of evidence for Jesus and for Christianity, that we're not just believing something that we hope to be true, or that we've just believed through all the generations in our family, or that maybe we're just believing it from someone else. There are all kinds of evidences that what we're believing is true.